Q&A.
Okay, so
From the South Shore of Nova Scotia. Hello. Hello, Susan.
okay, so I think we can begin, Jerry.
We can?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. From the Lanark Highlands. I reside in Ottawa, but today I'm at the cottage. So, je vous souhaite la bienvenue à notre présentation aujourd'hui. Mon nom est Gérald Lajeunesse et je suis le président de la Société de Jardin Botanique Canadensis. My name is Gerald Lajeunesse, and I am the chair of the board of directors of the Canadensis Botanical Garden Society. So as we work towards the creation of a botanical garden in our capital city, we acknowledge that the future garden resides on unceded lands of the Anishinaabe people. Our goal is to create an inclusive garden that represents the botanical reality of Canada and also involves the people that ensure its protection. To this end, we are in contact with our First Nations, and in particular, working with the Algonquin people who have occupied these lands of the Ottawa Valley for centuries. Today's presentation brings us halfway around the world to South Africa and a visit to the Kirstenbosch Botanical Garden, one of the world's premier garden destinations. A garden destination that is on my bucket list anyway. I look forward to today's presentation. So to do so, Satya Brink, member of the Canadensis Botanical Garden Board of Directors, will now introduce our guest speaker, Satya.
Hi, everybody, wherever you are, whatever time it is. What Jerry didn't tell you is I'm one of those crazy people who spend enormous amounts of money to buy the giant protea flower, which is the national flower of South Africa. So you can imagine that I'm quite thrilled about this opportunity. Alors, c'est raisonnable que je suis la personne qui vous présente le conférencier aujourd'hui. So Alice Notten from the Kirstenbosch Gardens outside of Cape Town in South Africa. It's a privilege to take a virtual tour of the Kirstenbosch Gardens with someone who loves the garden and has worked there for 30 years. Alice is originally from Joburg, as they call it, Johannesburg, but moved to Cape Town to study at Cape Town University. She's a horticulturist and a botanist. As the environmental interpretation officer, she communicates scientific concepts and information to visitors to try to explain natural science, the complexities of natural sciences without using any jargon, but simple language, easy to understand. She presents information on storyboards and posters all around the Kirstenbosch Garden. Quelle chance! Who would be better to tell us about the wonders of Kirstenbosch Garden? Please welcome Alice Notten. Alice Notten. The floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. Is my screen showing?
Not yet.
Hi, Alice. You can share your screen now.
Okay.
You may notice that Alice is a black box with us today, and this is not the first time that sometimes people have camera issues, but Alice is very much here, and the great thing is we can see her beautiful presentation. Alice, over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, is it showing?
Yes, it is. Beautiful.
Okay. Okay. Well, thanks for the introduction, and it is quite strange to be talking to people so far away, somewhere I've never been. But thank you for inviting me. Oh, here's this thing now. Right. So for the benefit of people in Ottawa, I just thought I'd show you exactly where we are, as I'm sure you mostly are aware. But so we are 20 hours away by flight. If there was a direct flight, I'm not really sure, thanks to Google. So Cape Town is on the southwestern tip of Africa, literally on the very tip. Cape Town is on a very narrow peninsula that juts out into the Atlantic Ocean. And Kirstenbosch lies on the eastern slopes of Table Mountain, which is the mountain chain that is on the peninsula. And we're 13 kilometers from the city center, nestled up against the eastern slopes of Table Mountain. Table Mountain looms very large in our lives in Cape Town. In fact, the people that don't live here, I say we all have mountain sickness because the mountain's there, so everything will always be all right. So that is the aerial view of Kirstenbosch, which doesn't look like much. It's a 36-hectare garden. The garden is the very tiny little bit in the middle of a very large 500-hectare estate. And the estate is a nature reserve, which is managed as a protected area. And the garden, there are no fences between us and the garden. So we are part of the nature reserve. And we do take that quite seriously in terms of not using pesticides and things that harm. So welcome to Kirstenbosch. This is our main gate. And as I say, the mountain looms very large in our lives, and it looms up behind the garden and is very much part of our view. That is our tallest peak. That's Maclear's Beacon. And the face of the mountain is called the Eastern Buttress. And in terms of orientating yourself to Cape Town, that big slab of rock is the eastern end of the table, which is on the, so if you were to climb up, you would be on the flat part, and then you'd be looking north across the Table Bay. And that peak is very iconic for our Kirstenbosch. We use it on a lot of our imagery. It's called Castle Rock, for obvious reasons. Some people call it Teddy Bear Mountain, but I think Castle Rock is kind of maybe a little bit more apt. And it is very much, it's a very big feature of the garden. So that is our mountain backdrop. And the loop that is behind our garden. And 4 streams, mountain streams, arise on those mountains, of which 3 of them flow through the garden. The one called Falkat, which basically means gray cat in Afrikaans, because that's a little wild cat, is a little gray wild cat. And Nursery Stream, they join up just on the mountain, and then Nursery Stream comes into the garden. Skeleton is another one. This flows through the garden. It and Nursery join together and flow through the garden. And then Window and Skeleton join up just below the garden and flow into Table Bay. But the reason we get quite, because it's water is very important in a garden's life, and the perennial water supply is one of the reasons why Kirstenbosch was initially chosen as a botanical garden. And it was a successful farm before it was a garden, thanks to its perennial water. So you'll see that our water has an amber color. And when it gets agitated, it forms this foam. But it's not polluted in any way. In fact, it's perfectly clean and used to be drinkable. And I wouldn't drink it nowadays that there's so many more people are out and about, but it is very clean. And the amber color is caused by plant tannins, which stain the water. And then when it gets agitated, the tannins make that soapy. But if you smell it, it's not soapy at all. It smells very earthy and it's very clean. But it is a bit disconcerting at first. And also a feature of the garden is we have a natural spring that bubbles up in the garden. And before the garden was proclaimed, the landowner built this little bath around where the eye of the spring is. And in contrast to the surface water, the spring water is absolutely clear and is of good drinking quality. It's really a very beautiful, tranquil space. And it used to be used for drinking water for the farm, but we now use it as, we just keep it ornamental, but it flows constantly all year, which is, as I said, quite good if you're wanting a perennial water supply. And in South Africa, water is a scarce commodity. And also on an aside, this water comes out of the aquifer, which is under Table Mountain. And we also have a borehole higher up the slope. And all our drinking water on the estate is out of the aquifer too. So at Kirstenbosch, we have spring water on tap, which is quite a good feature. And back to our mountain backdrop, to explain our geology, which I won't be too boring about it, I promise. It's really very simple. We have basically 3 rock types, which are, there are 3 written there, the sandstone, the mudstone, and the granite. So the sandstone is the gray rock that makes up the cliffs. It's a 600-meter thick slab of rock. And it's very coarse and sandy. And so when it weathers away, it's like bristly, coarse white sand and quite coarse and quartzitic. And that's also the reason why we have such pale beaches in the Cape, all thanks to the sandstone. And then also the way the cliffs, because it's such a durable rock, it tends to break off big chunks. And I mean, we have lots of these sort of like quite small house-sized rocks that luckily don't plunge down very often, but when they do, they leave a trail of destruction behind them. And they're quite fun for the kiddos to climb, practice your rock climbing skills without too much danger. And then below the sandstone, there's a layer of grafwater mudstone, which is on at the level of the one hiking path on the estate. And if you keep your eyes peeled, you will see quite interesting, like that's a mud crack pattern that has been, it's ossified, I mean, what is the word, preserved in the rock. You also find ripple marks and all sorts of things. But it's a very thin layer, and that gives rise to slightly better soil than the sandstone, which is more clayish, or sort of shale soil. And then bedrock is made up of Cape granite, which is an igneous rock, the other 2 both being sedimentary. But you won't see it anywhere because it's mostly covered up. But the one place where you will see it is on the 300-meter contour path where the waterfall has exposed the granite. And so, and there's also, it looks beautiful. This time of the year, it's running quite strongly. So that's the skeleton waterfall. And then the best way to see the bits of the rock is if you look downstream in the rivers, then you will see bits of the rocks all broken up and jumbled together. And that's what they look like. But in terms of why we are interested in geology, is it also informs our soil. So Kirstenbosch being on the granite, our soils are quite rich and clayish compared to the soils higher up the mountain, which are very, very sandy and very, very nutrient poor. So in a way, it's good having the rich soil, but it also means we struggle to grow the plants that prefer the very well-drained soil because they rot quicker and just don't do as well in our heavier soils. So briefly into the history of Kirstenbosch. Long before Kirstenbosch was a botanical garden, it was the territory of the Kuna people, who were pastoral herders, and they would have a fairly large range that they would move between as the seasons change, because the seasons are quite sharp in South Africa. We have a very dry summer and quite a wet and mild winter. So they would move for the grazing and for where the foods became available. And from the point of view in Kirstenbosch, one of the things they would use Kirstenbosch for would be for water and for these fruits, which we call the wild almond just because they look a bit like an almond, but they're actually not in any way related to almonds. They're a Protea family shrub called Brobaeum stellatifolium. And if you don't know how to treat these almonds, they will kill you because they've got quite a strong toxin in. But the Kuna knew how to treat them to make them edible, and it was quite an important part of their staple food source. And that is the tree it comes from, and it grows plentifully at Kirstenbosch, but it likes to have its feet that's usually near the rivers and the streams. And it has these star-shaped leaves, which is hence the name stellatifolium, and these rather beautiful flowers in early summer, followed by the almondy-looking fruits. And then when the Dutch East India Company arrived in 1652 and landed and took control of this area, they came into conflict with the Kuna because they were then now permanently living in the territory of what used to be the Kuna's territory. And there was, of course, conflict. And as the settlement expanded around from Table Bay around to Kirstenbosch side, they were pushing further and further in and taking the forests and stuff. And the Kuna and the Dutch, they negotiated. And one of the things they were negotiating about was access back into the settlement for them to collect the fruits and the foods that they used to previously collect. But they didn't win they didn't get that concession. And instead, what was to me is always but like rubbing salt in the wound, is that Van Riebeck used this species, the wild almond, to plant his hedge, which was part of the barrier that ran from the Table Bay right round to our forest where Kirstenbosch is. So not only were they excluded, but they used their own food trees to do the excluding, which I think was rather mean. But that is always the first physical barrier, first physical border between the arriving Dutch and the indigenous Kuna. And it has been a symbolic thing in our country for many years. And the remnants of it are in Kirstenbosch. There are a couple of those original trees that still exist. But ironically, they don't grow as well when they're up on the drier slope. So they didn't really ever perform an actual function, but that is not really the issue. And today they really are just enjoyed by the children as a lovely natural jungle gym, which is maybe a fitting end. But there are these beautiful, massive trees, and they were a relatively good choice. He wasn't entirely wrong to choose them because they coppice very freely, and they are quite strong growing and clearly long-lived. But it is but as I said, it's a protea family tree, which is interesting in that its closest relatives actually are in Australia, which is ironic because we also have proteas, but they're a different branch of the family tree. So that's Brobeum. And then after all of that, and the Dutch East India Company would pretty much took all the timber they could out of Kirstenbosch, and then they moved on, and Kirstenbosch was left. And then when the British arrived in the 1795 and early 1800s, they sold off the land, and it was sold to a private person who then started farming it. So during the 1800s, Kirstenbosch was a farm with vineyards and very nice homestead, which is already here in a bit of a state of ruin. But then at the end of, I think it was 1895, Cecil Rhodes bought it from the Cluties, but he didn't want it to live in. So he just wanted to sort of not have somebody there. So he bought the land, but then didn't use it. And so it fell into disrepair. And by the time Kirstenbosch was a garden, the homestead was completely a total ruin. Very little could be recovered from it. And the farm itself was described as a thicket of weeds and hordes of feral pigs. And so it was a real mess for the first guys to sort out. But the person that saw the potential in Kirstenbosch to turn it into what it is today was Henry Harold Welsh Pearson, who was a Cambridge graduate, British botanist, who came to South Africa to be the professor of botany at what became University of Cape Town. And his primary interest was Welwitschia, which is that dwarf, terminally truncated caudiciform from the Namibian desert. So the closest he could get in those days was to come to Cape Town. And he undertook 3 quite arduous journeys up. And he actually he wrote the first botanical information on Welwitschia. So we thank Welwitschia for bringing Pearson to South Africa, who then gave us Kirstenbosch. So Kirstenbosch he worked about 10 years to get it going, to get the government to commission it. What was the word? Proclaim it, sorry, and get everybody on board. And it wasn't an easy thing, and they had to make concessions like we won't do any economic botany, because that was the Agricultural Council, so we weren't allowed to do economic botany. And this is what Kirstenbosch would have looked like when Pearson first saw it, as a rundown but still very beautiful farm. And the legend goes that he was thinking of having it, or the story I should say goes, there's another plot of land closer to the university, a little bit further north, but there was a student called Neville Pillins who knew Kirstenbosch well, because even though it didn't really belong to anybody, and it was kind of an open land, and people used to picnic and come and do things and relax, it was a well-known beauty spot. So he said, no, wait, come, let me show you. And he brought Pearson to see Kirstenbosch. So, to forget Grooterskuur, this is much better. And they took a cart up from Newland Station, and they took it up, and as they got off at pretty much the spot, and he led Pearson in, Pearson apparently was struck by everything was so perfect in beauty, and he said, this is the place, and that was it. And then about 3 years later, Kirstenbosch was proclaimed as a botanical garden. And in those early days as well, it was hard work. They were, of course, underfunded, which is a story of our development. And I'm sure many botanical gardens share that. And short-staffed with, well, few staff. And it was at the time of, it was a time of the century when there was, I think it was World War I was about, it had just been, and the other one was brewing, and there were depressions and illnesses and all sorts of things going on. And a lot of the early work was clearing the thickets of weeds and catching the feral pigs and doing basic construction. So it was pretty hard work. And I look back at those people and I have great respect. And I think they work a lot harder than we do nowadays without front end loaders and all sorts of things. It's just strength and determination and a vision. And a lot of Kirstenbosch is we use our natural stone. So we've had stone masons working since day one. And a lot of we use our natural stone in our paths and in our curbing and on our walls. It's very beautiful, right? So those are our first stone masons working away in the dell. And just for contrast, this is what that area looks like today. And what they constructed back in those early days, the bone, it's pretty much still there. All that has changed is the vegetation. So that is what we call the dell. Another of our historic parts of the garden is Camphor Avenue. So back to Rhodes again. He was at one point president of the colony of the Cape, and I think that's the house called Groote, which is today houses the Premier of the Western Cape. And he had there was a track from that house all the way past Kirstenbosch, all the way to Constantia Neck, which apparently is where the pub is. So he used to take this ride quite regularly, and he planted sort of avenues of sets of trees along this whole road. And our set, starts off with Pinus radiata, and then there's a bit of Moreton Bay fig, Ficus macrophylla, and then there are camphors, and then further on they're chestnuts, but the chestnuts are just out of Kirstenbosch. So our section has mostly of these camphors, and they were planted in 1898. So they're pretty small back here. This is 1916. And then this is how they look today, pretty much the same spot. So we kept the camphors, even though they're not indigenous, because when Kirstenbosch was proclaimed, the whole ethos was just to focus on the South African flora. And but plants that were pre-existing they stayed. So we didn't plant more, but they kept these ones and let them stay because they are historic. And today it's a beautiful, shady, quite magnificent avenue. And this is one of our main things. These are streptocarpus. I don't think it has a common name. I think some people call them, not African violet, that's another one, but yeah, we just call them streps or streptocarpus. And plectranthus, which is a sage family, very easy to grow, very rewarding. We also grow them as indoor plants. They come in a wide range of colors and shapes and things. They're very beautiful. And of course, clivia, or as how it should be said, clivia, or bush lily in our local parlance. And then not so historic, but one of our best other walkway features is our tree canopy walkway, which everyone calls the boomslang, which means tree snake, because when the designers were explaining it to us, they explained that it was modeled on the skeleton of a snake. And the boomslang in South Africa is a specific kind of snake, which is obviously a tree snake, but everyone's rather afraid of the boomslang because they have quite bad toxic. They're not as bad as a cobra, but they have the kind of venom that is difficult to survive. But they very rarely bite, so they're not really terrifying snakes. But they are extremely venomous. So the boomslang has become one of our most popular features in the garden. It was built in 2013, 2014, which is 2013 was the year of our centenary, and it was our centenary project. So it's 130 meters long and about 12 meters high. And because we're such a slopey ground, it takes advantage of the slope. So it starts at ground level, then goes out over the slope and then goes back to ground level. And it sways and it's very lightweight and you feel like you're in the tree. It really is quite magical. And it is very popular, as I say. It gives you wonderful views over the garden and then back over the Cape Flats to the Hottentots Holland on the other side. And when you're up there, there's quite regularly an owl that comes and sits, as you can see how close it is, and it tends to be fast asleep. And it's literally sometimes feels like you reach out and tickle it on the toes. Yeah, but we do have about 2 at least breeding pairs of spotted eagle owls in Kirstenbosch. So we kind of, and they seem quite habituated and not dangerous. They are rather fun. And that's it. So it's not hugely high, but it's yeah, quite special for us. And I think the first of its kind. It was a very good, and I think it won awards and things when it was built, and it's a very good example of engineers and architects working well together. So then back to the plants in the garden. The first living collection in Kirstenbosch was the cycads, which actually, again, back to Pearson, being a conifer man or a gymnosperm man. This was his, also like Woolwich's, he liked these as well. He liked all conifers, to be honest. So he collected in his time, and he was actually director for a very short, he was only 4 years. He had a rather untimely death. He died in hospital from a result, I think he got sepsis from a botched operation or something. He was in his 40s when he died. He accomplished a great deal in his short life. But he collected 300 cycads, of which many of which are still alive today. That is the cycad amphitheater today. A lot of those were his original plants, and we've obviously added to them over the years. And we've got pretty much a full collection. We're missing 1 or 2 species of the Southern African cycads. So the cycad on the left is one of Pearson's cycads, and the one on the right is the same plant still there today. And that's Encephalatus latifrons, which is critically endangered, which means it's pretty much on the brink of extinction. In fact, all our cycads are endangered. And cycads are very puzzling and unique plants in that they are pretty much on their own branch of the evolutionary tree. They are cone bearing, but they're not really conifers. And all of the ones in our country are on the brink of extinction. I think there are 3 that aren't threatened. All the rest are threatened in some way or other. This one is already extinct in the wild. This is Encephalatus woodii. Comes from KwaZulu-Natal. It's not been seen in the wild since 1916, and it's only ever found a male plant. So even if we were to find it's basically extinct because it can't breed. But there are very many examples of it, which is ironic. There are about 500 clones of this plant. Ours is a clone of one of the original trunks that's in the Durban Botanical Gardens in Durban. But it is a quite impressive tree. And it doesn't cone every year, but that when it does, they are rather attractive. We've been taking the pollen, and they cross the pollen with its closest relatives, sort of in the hope to try and breed something as close as possible to what it was. And also for the last couple of years, we've had a Dino Expo in our cycads, which has been quite a hit with the kids. And also they're African dinosaurs, which, even though we know they must have been here, being an old continent with not much, we don't have very many fossil beds. But these are the ones they find in the Eka shales and around Drakensberg in the Eastern Cape. It's called Ardenix, which means earth claw. Because when they saw him, this big claw was sticking out of the rock, or her. So Kirstenbosch, the garden is divided into sections, and they group them either in times of like we have a Protea garden and the Erica garden and a Restia garden, but we also then do things like we'll have an arid area. So in the early days when they set out these plans, we pretty much stuck to what they originally did back in the 20s and 30s, just expand or improve on what they've done. So this is what we call the fynbos walk, which is a path that traverses the high back end of the garden, sort of the circuit around the top of the valley of Kirstenbosch. And I'm assuming everyone knows what fynbos is, but fynbos is it's actually originally sort of a Dutch word meaning little bushes, basically. And it's the vegetation type that grows naturally on the mountains of the Western Cape. Just as you would say grassland or forest, fynbos is fynbos. So it's characterized by proteas, ericas, restios, and geophytes like moreas, and which don't live our soil very much. We don't have many of them, gladioli and that sort of stuff. So when you see those four combinations, you pretty much show you in fynbos. And we get very excited about it because it's we call it a Cape floristic region, but in the other parlance, it's a floral kingdom, all on its own. And it's really only in the Southwestern Cape. So it's the only floral kingdom that falls within the borders of a single country, and it's here. And until we grow up and we know it well, but when you leave and then you realize the differences, because we just have so many species, it's difficult to describe unless you experience it. But where, you know, like say, for example, in England, and you look at this gorse that's flowering in the south, and then in the middle, it's the same species, and up in the north, it's the same species. We're in our land, that's not the same. You'll see a yellow flowering pea, and it'll be this species, sometimes even a different genus will be 10 species, 10 steps away. And then you go onto the next mountain, it's a whole different set of species. So constantly changing. And that's kind of what makes it special. Or yeah, interesting, the botanists particularly. So this is the fynbos walk. It takes you through the Restio garden, which is the top, which starts at the gate 3. So Restio is the plant in the foreground with the golden tips. It's a reed-like plant, but it's not a reed and it's not a grass. It's a Restio. And yeah, you find them here and in a little bit in Australia. So the Restio garden, and they're male or female, and they are wind pollinated, but the bees do take advantage of the pollen. That's a Namakwa Restio. They have terrible names, and they're taught as Bachmaniae, but they, being fynbos, they're about sort of 30 Lemnotortus. So they are I find them quite difficult to get to grips with. They all look pretty much the same to my eye. They are beautiful, and they are used quite well as in landscaping. And this is the Protea garden, which I don't have the wide lens, so I have to take two to show you the mountain backdrop. But the Protea garden really is probably my favorite, and it is a beautiful. You're up high, you've got these lovely views. You feel like you're half 1 foot in the wild, that you're in the garden. It's not just about proteas, and of course that's our king protea, which is, because we're a kingdom, you have to have a king, but it is the biggest of the proteas, and it grows quite well here. And it also grows naturally on the slopes above the garden. And they are pollinated by these long-tailed birds, which are also endemic. They occur only here. They're called sugar birds, and there's the Cape one. So what they do is they're nectar feeders, and while they're feeding, it dips its head in, and then the pollen touches its head, and then it moves it around. And they're very intriguing birds because they make these quite twittering, kind of almost like metallic noises. They're quite characterful. The male has a long tail, the female doesn't have quite such a long tail. They feed on the pincushions. That's also a protea relative. They in the protea family. Some people call them pincushion proteas. Some of us just call them pincushions. Another kind of pincushion. Another kind of pincushion. And that's a different bird. That's the sunbird, which they do look a lot like hummingbirds, but they're not as small, and they're a different. They're not the same. They're not related. They're on a different clade altogether. I think, yeah, I forget which. I think ours are passerine birds, whereas it's not. Yeah, they're not the same. They just have evolved similarly because they inhabit a similar niche, and they are very beautiful. Then also note some of the hummingbirds are as small as bees, and ours don't get that small. Sugarbird again. That's another protea relative called Mimetes, which we call pagoda because of its kind of pagoda-ish shape, the way they all stack up like that. Mimetes, or mimets, if you want to say it that way. And then one of my favorite trees is the silver tree, which has its natural population at Kirstenbosch. If you look on the lower slopes above the garden, you'll see it growing there. There's also a protea relative. Leucadendrons are fascinating because they're also male or female. So this is the male, and that's the female. And that's the developing cone, which also has beautiful in silver, but as it gets older, it turns woody. And they're big. They're like as big as a hand, as a human hand. If you you hold them easily, they're huge, but make quite good Christmas decorations. And that's also a leucadendron, but a different kind, much smaller. And again, there are hundreds of them, so you'll never get bored. And really, there's pretty much one that you could find to fit in any situation. And that's another kind of protea called the cerurea, which they call spider heads because they sort of have this hairy thing going on amongst the leaves. It looks almost as if a spider has laid its, spun its web in among the leaves. And that is pollinated by butterflies. And then we have the fynbos walk also, and the protea garden is home to other fynbos shrubs. And this is one that is interesting in the way it is a fabaceae, a legume, and it initially was misclassified as a protea family. So the botanist got it wrong, first one that looked at it, and it still fools people to this day. That's a lovely one, really. And it's also bird pollinated. Quite a lot of our plants are bird pollinated. And then things like the bazilias, which are very, that's one of the families that only you find in fynbos, in the CFR, the Cape Floristic region. Braziliaceae. And we have, this is one of the geophytes, the bulbs, and that also has a funny story in that the people in Sarnia, which is Sarnia, one of the islands in the Channel Islands, they think it's theirs because it's one of the plants that were collected very early on. It and the Amaryllis belladonna, they got to Europe quite soon and they've become naturalized in many places. And some people don't even know they don't belong there. So it's quite funny when we go there and we say, but that's ours. But anyway, so that's the Nerine Sarniensis. And when you get up close, it has beautiful gold dust. It's also quite well entrenched in horticulture because it's quite big and impressive. And then we get to the Erica garden, which is just further down the slopes. Ericas being heaths. So they come in all shapes and sizes, and they come from all over, and you could literally spend your entire career just studying Ericas, and you would still never really get to grips with them. So the one on the red one is the Erica Neville, and it's actually named after Neville Pillins, who's the one who introduced Pearson to Kirstenbosch. And the one on the left is Erica verticillata, which is famous because it almost went extinct, not just extinct in the wild, but extinct. But luckily it had survived in cultivation and has since been reintroduced back into the wild. And it's still listed as extinct in the wild because it has to survive, I think it's 3 fire cycles before it gets taken off the extinct list. One of our success stories of gardening, and that's Erica Neville with its pollinating bird. That's a female. Oh no, it's getting its color. Sorry, it's not a female. Sunbird, but without his color. And that's a beautiful one of our endemics. It only occurs on the peninsula and only on 2 mountain peaks in the southern peninsula. Very strange. That's just rather beautiful. And that's what they call the pink smoke heath, because it just looks a bit like, because it's very tiny flowers. So the small ones, the brightly colored tubular flowers are pollinated by birds, and the little urns and cups usually have a honey scent of some sort, and they are usually bees or other little flying insects. Lots more flying insects we don't necessarily notice or know. Another beautiful sunbird. Back to the world, to our extinct heath. I do love those two with their purple and orange, and they got a very sweet little cheep kind of noise. They're very sweet. More bees, and that's a sort of a sticky, those glandular hairs give it a clammy feel. That comes from the Otaniquas. They're also a lovely bird pollinated. And the buchu garden, which is, buchus are citrus family. So when you touch the leaf and rub it, it'll give you a very strong smell. And they are very rare species. And this is one of the most common ones. Used to be used for medicinal purposes. And you can buy buchu tea, and it works quite well as for kidney problems and for, I think that's also mildly antiseptic if you make it into a wash. And the kuna used to dry it and then use it as an antiperspirant kind of deodorant, which, yeah, find the one you like the smell of, and there you go. And the protea garden and the fynbos walk is all around very wildlife friendly. So we the bird watchers, we get people come daily, come and watch the birds. And we get, this is we used to call them francolins, the Cape spurfowl. They live up there, and you'll find butterflies doing their pollinating. That's our biggest butterfly, really quite special to see it. Doesn't always come down into the garden. But gamas and these little things, the girdled lizards, I think I forget the proper name, Cordula, skinks, tortoises, all resident up there, and snakes too. But this is just a harmless little slug eater. But we do get puff adders. But in all the years that Kirstenbosch has been in the garden, no one has ever been bitten by a puff adder. So I wouldn't worry too much. I suppose it's always the first time, as my sister says. But yeah, they are dangerous because they are ambush predators and they don't get out the way. Their whole plan is to be invisible. So they curl up and be invisible. And then if you come close, they just hiss at you. And it literally sounds like someone either like somebody slipping on gravel, or like somebody described it as almost like a high pressure hose with a small hole in it. So you often don't realize what it is, that it's hissing at you until it's too late. So they're responsible for the most bites, but they don't necessarily kill you. It'll be a nasty, painful, necrotic wound, but not necessarily going to die from it. Although it does kill quite a few dogs every year, but not obviously in Kirstenbosch where we don't allow dogs, but on the mountain and in farms and things. But they are very beautifully marked if you appreciate snakes. So then back to our garden. Another grouping, of course, is our arboretum, which is where our tree canopy walkway is. But the arboretum is quite a fun place, but it wasn't very well visited until we put the tree canopy walkway in it. But it is a collection of about almost 500 species of Southern African trees. And of course, with the shade-loving perennials growing under it, and that's one of the Plectranthus again. We have a Matthews rockery, which is named after the first curator, Jimmy Matthews. And it is mainly for arid flora because, yeah, we have a lot of arid areas. So on the incoming map in the beginning, you could see how much of our country is brown. So we have a lot of arid areas. So those are aloe arborescens, which is one of the few that actually can survive Kirstenbosch because we are often too wet for most succulents. So these are the ones that can grow outdoors, and we've chosen a spot where they get the most sun, and it's on a nice well-drained slope where they survive. But the rest of them that can't survive, we have to build a roof for, and that is our Botanical Society Conservatory, which has also been described as a cathedral to plants, which is quite apt. It's a beautiful triple span roof, and it essentially is a roof to keep the plants dry because we are very wet in winter, and so it's perfectly fine in summer, but in winter everybody drowns and it's too wet. So the roof is, and this whole house is designed without any heating equipment or any cooling equipment. So the angle of the roof, and it's got natural airflow, and everything is designed to keep it cool in summer and to let in maximum light in winter and to keep off the rain. And it has worked very well. So we grow all the plants that can't survive outside there. And in the center is a baobab. So we've divided, like we have a lot in the garden, we've done regions. So the one there is the Knashflakte, which is up the west coast, if you go there, a lot of parts of it, the ground, the plants that grow are literally about 5 centimeters off the ground. It is really quite surreal. And the knash is a grinding noise. So when you walk there, there's a lot of quartz pebbles, and you make a knash line with your feet as you walk, your shoes. And then back out into the garden, we have various theme gardens. This one is the fragrance garden, which is one of the few places in the world where children are invited to touch, which does of course make the garden quite high maintenance because we have to keep replacing all the plants that gets touched to death. But we've chosen fragrant flowers and fragrant leaves. And the one in the foreground is a very beautiful one that has a really strange coconutty pineapple scent. And that is the belladonna lily that has a lovely sweet scent. And then one on the left is one of our local sages. So it is also quite a popular garden. And that's our wild gardenia flowering. And we have a water-wise garden. As I said, we're a water-scarce country, so we're always trying to educate and encourage people to garden responsibly and not to lavish all our precious drinking water on your garden. And there are ways, and this garden explains the ways. And we had a terrible drought a couple of years back, where we had 3 years of almost zero rain in winter, which is our entire water plan is rain in winter. So when the dams are empty, we have no water in the summer. And it got to the point where we were planning what we called our day zero. And when we are like that, everyone is suddenly very water wise. But now that we are back to being normal, and it's okay, we can bring out the hoses and be bad behaved. But so we do try and get people to garden in a way that when the next day zero comes around, because it will, all the garden plants don't die. You plant the right ones and treat them the right way, and then they will tough out the summer without having to be watered. So that is what we're trying to get across here. And we have a useful and medicinal plants, not just medicinal plants. So it includes, that is a Kosa Mpondo hut, where we have a little display inside which explains all the uses. So we have divided the garden into sections of medicinal and then useful, like things that are useful for building and edibles as well. We have storyboards and labels that explain what all of them are about. And it is also quite a well-used garden, and the schools like it. And sometimes the gardeners get quite cross when people help themselves to our plants. So don't help yourself and taste them out when Bongi's looking, he gets very cross. We have a garden of extinction, which we try to highlight the fact that so many plants are threatened and some extinct. And a lot of it is caused because of it's just never-ending expansion of human settlements. We have a memorial stone to all the extinct plants, and when we have quite a few. So we have labels again that explain what their category is and what's threatening them. And then we tried this one as well to sort of, in a dead space, to show that plants that are gone are gone. But I hope we're not, I think sometimes I think we're always preaching to the converted. The people that should be seeing this don't care and just carry on burning fossil fuels and things. So then I also want to quickly go into the climate of Kirstenbosch. We have a wet, cool, we think we're cold, but I'm sure by Canadian standards, we really are not cold. So we have rain in winter, and our winter, of course, is now. We had a lovely storm last night and nearly got blown away. So we're not the Cape of Storms for nothing. So we have in sort of June, end of May, June, July, August into September is kind of winter. And we get cold fronts that come in off the south, and they rain on us for a few days and then they move away. So when it's raining, we get ephemeral streams that come off the mountain, and it's quite fun because if you go outside, you can hear them all after the rain has passed. And then our rivers are running beautifully again, whereas in summer, of course, they stop almost completely. And then in between the rainy days, we get these beautiful, perfect, windless, cool, but kind of warm, mild, sunny days. And winter is very much the aloe time. And yeah, aloes are beautiful, very iconic of South African. So that's what the rivers look like after rain. And then that's what they look like in the height of summer. And actually that is so swift that I would not walk across there. You would be swept away. Even though they're not so wide, they run very fast. And they actually roll the rocks down. You can hear the rocks being tumbled by the water. There's more aloes. This is the same as the aloe arborescens, very popular with birds and bees. That's our other sunbird, that's the double collar. Also quite a cheeky bird. And that's our beautiful malachite sunbird, which is the biggest of the sunbirds. There's a lovely whistle, very distinctive whistle. And another feature of our winter garden is the strelitzia, which they start in autumn and flower through until early summer. I think everybody knows strelitzias, but few people know that they come from a very small region in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. The original homeland is actually very small. Spring is probably the best month if you're wanting to see flowers. Although some people say spring starts in August, but yeah, technically it's September, October. I think up the West Coast, it might start in August. So for us, spring is very much Namaqualand daisies, which are what these are. Namaqualand being an area up the West Coast, which is pretty arid. It gets winter rainfall. So from nothing, it turns into these beautiful carpets of color. And it's quite a special place to visit. It's almost unbelievable when you see it the first time. So we have our own little Namakwa land every spring in Kirstenbosch. These are Acinia. They call them parachute daisy because the seeds have a little papery parachutey thing on them. I should have done a close-up, I'm sorry. And it is very much our season for flower. And in the early days of Kirstenbosch, they really only used to open the garden in spring, back into the sort of 30s and 40s. Because the rest of the time, no one would come because it was just, they didn't irrigate, so the lawns would die and it would be sort of only the hardened, and school kids would come, of course, if they have to. So pretty much in spring, everything's in flower, and we pack in as many colors as we possibly can. We have a lovely time. Like purple is another Acinia. It's almost too much for the camera. It sort of blurs out I've taken many pictures where it's just almost too much. And the purple behind it is a Senecio. And then we have a little succulent which we call phaeces, which are similar to the midday flowers and things that are in the trade. They are Lampranthus and Chrysanthemums, and they were also rather fun. And they a little bit later in the spring, more like late September, early October. And yeah, so we struggle to get a lot of them to grow because we've got to plant them constantly because they do suffer in our soggier soil where they're used to a more arid area. And in the back of that picture, you can see the red of the erythrina, the coral trees starting. They're also very much a feature of spring in the garden. And that just shows the reflections on our pond and all the babies. Spring is a lovely time of year. There's like goose babies. And all the new foliage as well is rather lovely. We still have that is an oak, which is a remnant from the days of the farm. We lose about one or two every winter because they almost like grow too fast in here. It's too warm and too wet, and they sort of like grow fast and then fall over. They get a fungal disease as well, which doesn't help them. So we don't have very many left. At one stage we had this little path is called Oak Avenue from the day when it was back in the early days, it was lined with oaks. And also we split it. I always split off early summer because it's cooler than summer proper. And it's very much, we have lots of plants that are a feature of early summer, like this thing that we call Wachendorfia, which is a marsh butterfly lily. Let's fix my labels. Very much a water plant. And lovely fresh foliage, which we don't do this in autumn. This is all the new growth in spring or late summer. That's a beautiful thing called Kaya anthotheca, which actually comes from very north, almost into just makes it into north of South Africa, but it's really a Zimbabwean, comes from up there. It likes us quite a lot. It does quite well here. And the other ones that do very well, are the Watsonias, which of course Australians hate because they're a weed in Australia, and Pelargonium, which a lot of people call geranium, but they are actually Pelargonium, which I won't go into now. And Macaya bella is one of my favorite plants. It's a shade-loving shrub, and it also flowers just in November. And it also is very picky about where it wants to grow. So it's quite difficult to get it to like where it is, and where it's happy, you leave it and it's happy. When you try and put it where it's not happy, it's just not going to help. And then midsummer is a very different place than winter. We get very little rain in summer, where in winter, half of the days like got a 50-50 chance of getting a rainy day, whereas and it can rain for a week. Whereas in summer, the whole month, you're lucky if you get 4 days of rain, and that rain is not really what I'd call proper rain. It doesn't even make puddles, it doesn't count, kind of thing. So anyway, so we do irrigate, of course, we have a dam. Agapanthus is very much a feature of the summer garden. And until I worked at Kirstenbosch, I had no idea there were so many agapanthus. But it is a lovely time of the year. Our lawns are green because we irrigate, and it's warm and it's great. And Kirstenbosch doesn't get the southeaster, so it's a lovely place to come when the rest of the peninsula is being blown away. This is a kind of very dainty one called Adelaide, which is very, very beautiful. And we mass plant it and edge the beds in it. It's very, very effective. And then this one I didn't know existed until I worked here. Comes from the Drakensberg, and they are deciduous, whereas the most common ones we know in South Africa are evergreen. So you probably are more familiar if you know them of the deciduous kind. But they come from high up in the north, and they have these much smaller heads with the droopy flowers, and they disappear underground back in the winter to survive the cold. This is one that comes from the Waterberg, which is up in the northern part of South Africa. I think it's in the Limpopo province. It's also very beautiful, also deciduous. And then this is one of our very popular ones called Graskop, after the town where it was first collected. And it's a very, very short, tight, almost purple flower. And the sunbirds love it. It's the only thing that this little sunbird comes down for. Otherwise, it stays up in the Protea garden. And another feature of November is our chestnut, the Cape chestnut. But it's not actually a chestnut. It's also citrus family. And it's only called chestnut because it vaguely reminded the botanist that first saw it of a chestnut tree. They don't have edible fruits, but it is a very beautiful tree. But it doesn't like wind and likes to be, so it grows for Kirstenbosch because we don't get much of the summer wind. And also for summer, butterflies are beautiful in Kirstenbosch. We have a few plants that they particularly love, and this one is the Cape forget-me-not. And they really, they will, if you wait there, they will come in the mid when it's warm and still. And then of course the summer rainfall plants come into their own in the summer. That is a I don't know if they've made it into horticulture, because they have recalcitrant seeds in that they don't store. So they have these very short-lived seeds. They grow, when you see them growing wild, you can hardly believe that because up in the north in summer and it's hot and dry and but they have thunderstorms. These softly beautiful things just pop out of the earth, and it's quite remarkable. They are quite spectacular. It's big. It's like not quite as big as a football, but not much smaller. And these also beautiful crinums, and they're both better in the shade or light shade, morning sun. This is a beautiful sweet scent as well, and it doesn't mind also if you plant it beside your pond. And at the bottom of our main lawn, as you come in the summer, this is our display, which is the Knifehophia. And behind that is the Desotis, which is a little bit short, doesn't flower for long. But the Knifehophia is we have a lot of them, and they pretty much last most of the late summer. And the birds love them too. The late summer is kind of morphing into autumn when we start to get a bit cooler. We've survived February, which is the hottest month. We've been into the 30s and it's been dry and windy and you just had enough. Now you're ready for the rain. And when you see these, the March lily, then you know, sure, thank goodness, autumn is on the way. So it looks similar, but it is actually very different to the crinum. And the other name is naked lady because they come up before their leaves. And they also just pop out of dry sand. They're very strange. And then in winter, their leaves come up. And that's another Desotis, which is quite a beautiful one at the bottom of the lawn. Also likes to have its feet wet. And they're interesting in that they are buzz-pollinated plants done by carpenter bees. Another one of my favorites is the Pride of the Carp, which is confusing because it sounds like the Cape, but it's actually not the Cape. It's a place called the Carp in Mpumalanga, which is in our Lowveld up north near the Kruger National Park. And they are you need quite a lot of space to grow this plant, but it is worth it. It's really quite a flamboyant, beautiful thing. And another feature of our late summer gardens are these rather scary spiders called Trichonephila fenestrata, and they look horrifying and they're about the size of a human hand. And when you first time you see them, if you're me, your heart leaps and you can't believe it, but actually they are harmless. They don't really want to bite us, but if you insist and you bother one and they bite you, it will be nothing, it will be less bad than a bee sting. So they don't have any venom, but they are very impressive looking. And they string their webs between the shrubs, and they've got that lovely golden color in them. They do look like they could do serious damage, but luckily we're not Australia, so they're actually not trying to kill us. And then when you do hit autumn proper, then you start getting more rain and it's much cooler. And you can see how the cloud comes over, and so that's kind of what we've been having with the winter sort of weather. Showers, passing showers, and then occasional downpours. And a feature of the autumn garden, when the oaks turn gold like that. And then we have, that's our pond, which is very beautiful. There's a lovely reflector because of the dark, it's dark. So our autumn color is not foliage, it is Canadensis. And these are also a sage family. They like sun, and they've got also very beautiful fragrance. They're called sage bushes. There are quite a few different kinds. That's the ones from the Soutpansberg, sorry. And then this is a hybrid that we developed, which has a very long-lasting color. I think they call it Turian purple. I'm not sure it's in the trade yet. And of course, this is the other one that is very much feature of autumn, is the lion's ear, also called wild dacher. Some people swear that it has some sort of narcotic, but yeah, you don't find it for sale in places where they sell tobaccos. I don't think it's as strong. And when you put it all together, it's quite special. So this is our autumn color. And then one thing that I love very much about Kirstenbosch is that it's because we're bordering on a nature reserve, we don't use pesticides and things. So the wildlife does flourish. And this beautiful thing is a Cape Robin chat, and they use our storyboards and our signage as hunting print, which is great. And our fountains, that's the goose using our fountain, which clearly has to have its drainage corrected. But yeah, they bath in them and they drink the water, and they're quite tame. They're quite habituated. Invade our picnics. They can be quite bad. They do sometimes scratch kids. Those birds, they're guinea fowls. And they, of course, do love them. Right? That's a photo opportunity. And they couldn't really care less about us. So it is quite easy to take photographs of them. And they sing on our statues. That's the spur fowl. And Egyptian goose again, they do graze. And they do cause damage, and they do graze seedlings. We do sort of tolerate them. And we have lots of food for the birds. And that's a seed eater. It's another kind of canary. More pollen. And if you're wanting photographic tips, what you do is you position yourself near the food source with the sun in the right position, and you wait, and the birds will come. And that's a pair of the sugar birds. You see the male with a long tail and the female with a shorter tail. And all that yellow on its face is pollen. And that's I was actually photographing the plant, the Mimetes, and the bird came into the shot, which I thought was rather fun. Looked a little bit sort of irritated with me, like I was in his space, which I suppose I was. And that's another one. That's a Chasmanthe, which is only 3 species, and they all occur in our little part of the world. And they grow and flower in winter and are dormant in summer. And they're quite good in the garden because they don't mind to be wet in summer if you want a garden. So wherever you are in Kirstenbosch, you'll find there'll be a bird. That's a white-eye, and that's a beautiful, that's a massive tree from the Lowveld. It's feeding on the nectar, and then they come for the insects that feed on the nectar too. That's a strelitzia. Bees in the flowers, birds in the undergrowth, more in the flowers. So really, it's just, we are a haven for wildlife. Oops, change the label. More hunting perches. They nest. They raise their families. Yeah, so it really, it's a very harmonious place, Kirstenbosch, and we do our best to keep it so. That's a hoverfly. They need to be a bee. More hoverflies. Like Xonias are also a very strange kind of plant. They also grow super fast and then fall over. And then they are excellent water finders. So it's not the kind of plant you plant near your water pipes, because they will get in. And that's a buzz pollinated thing, Orpheum. This is quite fun to watch because actually it is buzzing, but it's not buzzing its wings. It buzzes its it's something else. It kind of vibrates and then pollen comes out. and there are more butterflies. So I said, you just park yourself near what you want to photograph and they will all be there. Or sometimes you didn't have to park, you just follow the butterflies. Yeah. I did that one already, sorry. And also to have the wildlife, you have to put up with some of the larval phases, which I remember somebody describing to me that caterpillars, you must change your thinking and think of them as butterflies in disguise, and then you maybe will put up with them more. But it is a difficult lesson. But we try not to kill too many. And the other ones are scary wasps, but they're not so aggressive. They're not like hornets. But they are horrifying when you see them. I hate seeing them when they catch a spider because it's the most gruesome death for the spider. Praying mantises, and then these are called protea beetles. And they sometimes credited with doing some pollinating, but I don't think they do much. They do fight it out in the flowers. And we have to put up with the bad guys as well as the good guys. There's also a bad guy, even though he's beautiful. He is a vegetarian. Chafer beetles, dung beetles. And then that's difficult to see, but it's a crab spider that's caught some poor little solitary bee. They lurk in the flowers in spring. Another one, a white one there. And we have funnel spiders, which are, you have to creep up very slowly to catch them. Otherwise they just scuttle back down their funnel. And the other thing is you must watch where you put your fingers in Kirstenbosch because spiders are often under things. I learned that one the hard way too. And we have a freshwater crab that has a unique way of carrying water in its carapace so that it can breathe, and it crosses, and it gets quite aggro with us when we try and walk past it, clacks its things at us, and yeah, they're quite fun. But they do live in our freshwater streams, and there's more gamas. They are everywhere. And the lizards, and geckos, and the skink again. And the tortoise looking a bit curious. Yeah, and that's in all the years I've been at Kirstenbosch, that is my only solitary sighting of a cobra, and it was very quick, and it crossed the path so fast I could barely catch it, click in time to get its tail as it slipped into the bushes. But we do have a resident cobra in the Cyclade amphitheater. It lives in one of the drains there. But in all the years, no, it's never harmed anybody. And the frogs, and we have other frogs that make noises that I've never seen. And there's the boomslang, which I actually had to step back to get this photograph. It crossed the path right in front of me, and it was actually hunting for birds. It wasn't interested in me in the slightest. The other coloration is black and yellow, female. But they get quite big, so they're pretty impressive snakes. But yeah. And there's one of our breeding. That's a chick. We have our own pest control. They hunt for moles and rats and things. And other thing that we don't chase away are the moles. So we have a Cape mole rat, which is what causes these mounds. And we have a golden mole, which causes these little shallow funnels. What are they called? Tunnels, sorry. But we don't, I think that one is actually an endangered species, so we don't chase them away. And we have porcupines that I have never seen a porcupine in the garden, although we do sometimes capture them and relocate them. They eat the bulbs. So we do struggle to grow bulbs in Kirstenbosch. So the bulbs do spend most of their time in the nursery. And then the ones we dare plant out often get eaten. So the arum, that is an arum at 8. They love arums, and they eat quite a lot of the watsonias too. We have mongooses and these cute little striped mice, which are natural, indigenous. We also have a grijsbok, which just means grey buck. They generally come out in the dusk. You won't see them in the day in the busy garden unless they get chased by mistake out of where they've been skulking for the day. And we get caracal too, which is, we had a really exciting time last year where a mother caracal had her kittens in the garden. And then this is one of the youngsters. And I didn't seek it out, it just walked straight past me. And it was rather fun. They got super outsized ears. And just to finish, Kirstenbosch not only is a garden, if you feel like hiking, we have very many hiking trails. You can hike across the estate, you can hike up the mountain, and we have open slopes like this in the fynbos, and we have beautiful, deep, dense, dark forest, and the waterfall I showed you earlier. And then this is the view back down from beside Castle Rock back down into the garden. My only proviso with the hiking is that you must please take care when you hike, because it is very accessible and very easy. Table Mountain has a disproportionate number of deaths for its size and difficulty. So I do think, because it is so easy, we forget that it is actually a mountain, and people fall down steep bits and they get lost on ledges, and the mist comes down and they get lost and fall over the edge. So if you do come to Kirstenbosch and you decide to go for a hike up Table Mountain, please be careful. And that's it. That's my last slide, if anyone's still with me.
We are still very much still here. Okay, over to you, Satya.
Wow, that was a comprehensive presentation of the Kirstenbosch Gardens. That's wonderful photographs of the flowers and the birds and the insects and the animals. It's a wonderful way of introducing us to the native flora and fauna of South Africa. And we're so impressed with the natural way in which you have been able to display your native plants and trees and flowers, and to show the different biomes and the ways in which these grow. So I'm sure it's been an inspiration to people working at Canadensis to be able to think of ways in which we can show our own native plants, to display them in such natural ways. So we are deeply grateful, and we thank you very, very much. And I'm sure you have made many of us want to visit Kirstenbosch. Now, Alice, I know you said you would answer some questions. I don't know how many questions there are in the chat, but I will pass you on to Kat, who will moderate the question session. Thank you very much. Merci.
Oh, you're welcome.
Alice, I know that you need to leave that building at Kirsten.
No, it's actually fine.
You're okay?
Well, weirdly enough, we're having a power failure at Kirstenbosch, so I'm actually using my sister's home internet.
Oh, okay. Well, if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. I just have to tell you, I think we were all spellbound between these amazing photographs, and also you are such a wonderful storyteller. So let me just say thank you. I think a top of mind for a lot of us is, are you the photographer of these? Like, did you take all these amazing pictures?
Yes, I did.
Wow.
Well, the thing is, I as interpreter, especially now with color printers, we can use images. Whereas in the early days when I started, we used to use drawings. So when color printers got better and I could use images, and I couldn't source a lot of images, so I just started taking my own. So that's where I started. And then being in around the garden all the time, I usually take my camera with me, so then I'm in the right place. So yeah, a lot of it is lucky chance, and others are lurking for hours in the bushes.
So one of the questions we had is, when is the best time, in your opinion, to visit the garden? For someone who wants to see it, they're saying, good weather. What is your suggestion?
Well, it really does depend on what you want. If you're wanting a summer holiday with swimming on the beaches, then I would come in November, December, or late, or otherwise, the summertime, our summer. But if you're wanting to see the maximum number of flowers, I would come in August, September. But it is the trouble with August, September, you can also get cool, rainy weather. And I also am told, with people that live up in the cold north, you're not always willing to come out in your summer, because that's your good time of the year. So you wouldn't ditch your good summer to come to our iffy spring. So it really, I mean, so most people come to take advantage of the summer. But if you're a flower tourist, come in August.
Lena is
For the Western Cape, for the winter rainfall things.
okay. Lena is asking, would Saldana felicia grow in the Ottawa area?
It is an annual, so you probably could get it to grow because it's a short-lived plant. So if instead of our annuals, they germinate in autumn, grow in winter and flower in spring. So in your climate, you would probably do it the other way around. As long as, you know, if you can mimic kind of a cool autumn, nice, cool summer. Yeah, but they are only a 6 month sort of to 8 month lasting plant. They're not perennials. So yeah, give it a try.
Thank you. Kathleen is asking,
I just need sun.
how many volunteers work at the garden?
I'm not sure of the number, but we do have a fair number. We have quite a strong society membership, and they help with guide. There's a whole team of very enthusiastic guides, and we have people that do potting. And we had more prior to COVID because we also used to put on a plant sale every year, and we're going to have to restart that. So all the volunteers that were involved with propagating and planting up for the sale have kind of like what's gone into mothballs until we start it up again. But yeah, we do have quite a strong program, but I'm not sure of the numbers. I'm sorry. I can, if you email me, I can find out and let you know.
Satya is asking, do you sell and ship seeds? Do you know?
We used to, but we don't anymore.
Okay.
So, but there is another company that does. If you Google a place called Silver Hill Seeds, they sell seeds.
Silver Hill Seeds?
Yeah, SILVERHILL seeds. So they do a lot what we used to kind of do. So they don't use ours. We have our garden to collect out of. They collect from various other places. But our operation is very similar to theirs. But we're not allowed to do it anymore. It's to do with our Biodiversity Act, which is unfortunate, but it is just not compatible with being whatever. I wasn't involved, but it was not allowed anymore. But we have for decades, but not since about 3-4 years ago we stopped.
Okay. Back to the photography, Xenia is asking what camera you use.
I have an old Nikon D90. And I chose a lens that is I have the lens that I can keep it wide, but also zoom in a little. So if you want to do the proper bird photography, you've got to get those massive lenses, and then you can get the detail on their feathers. So with my kind of photography, I got to get quite close to the bird to get a good shot. But Kirstenbosch makes it easy because they're quite tame. So I've gone for a multi-purpose lens. But I love my Nikon. It's worked very well for me.
Xenia says, thank you. I have to tell you, Alice, the chat here is just full of the most amazing comments. I'll just read you one and I'll send you a transcript. So everybody who's entered these wonderful comments about Alice's presentation and Kirstenbosch, please know that she will get them all. So Ellen writes, we were lucky to spend a week in the garden in 1977. We lived in Swaziland at the time. Now we are in Wilbraham, Massachusetts, USA. Thank you for the wonderful photos and presentation. A very unique botanical paradise. So there are many, many more like that because this has been an astounding. Jerry, do you have any questions you wanted to ask?
Well, not really. I have many questions, but I think we're running out of time, Kath. And I think I'd like to just give a bit of a summation and a final comment to the folks who are still listening. I know people have to drop off for different reasons, work and family and so forth. But maybe what we can do is contact Alice if she's available and interested, and we could maybe have some more technical questions that we could ask her at a later date.
Sure.
Would that work, Alice?
Yeah, that works for me.
Well, listen, I got to say, what a wonderful presentation to add to what Satya said. And what an inspiration for us as we work towards creating Canadensis. a big thank you again, Alice, for sharing your wonderful garden destination. And to everyone present today, we invite you to stay in touch as we communicate to you our future garden destinations from Canada, the United States, and elsewhere in the world. And thank you again for participating today. We had attendance from many places, including Galway, Scotland, Glen Valley, PEI, from Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, from Surrey, United Kingdom, from in Ontario, from Hamilton, Kingston, Oakville, Elmira, Hawkesbury, Thunder Bay, Goderich, Perth, Tilbury, Sutton, Oshawa, Gotterham, St. Eugene, from Chester County, Pennsylvania, from Castlegar, BC, Courtney, BC, from Cape Town, South Africa, from Phoenix, Arizona, from Las Vegas, Nevada, and of course, many, many folks from Ottawa. So you see, it's so inspiring to realize that we're getting people participating from everywhere, not just in Canada and Ottawa. So to all our folks still remaining online, we hope to see you again this fall. So do visit our website and social media, and hopefully you'll become a member if you aren't already, because we want and need to build a botanical garden in Ottawa. So thank you again, Alice, for your inspirational presentation. And on behalf of everyone in attendance, we hopefully some of us will get to visit you and talk to you in person. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you again.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Alice. Thanks, everybody. This presentation has been recorded, and you'll be able to find it on the Canadensis website starting on Monday. Anyone who registered for the event will be receiving an email that gives you the website address for that. So once again, as we sign off, thank you so much, Alice. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.